Right, we're going to make a start. Welcome everybody. It's really nice to see so many of you here this evening. My name's Sharon Grace and I'm Professor of Criminal Justice and Social Policy. So it's a pleasure to be here tonight to introduce you to this evening's event. This is part of the university's celebration of International Women's Day and Women's History Month. And it's an opportunity for us to reflect on gender issues and to celebrate women's social, economic, cultural and political contributions to society, both historically and for this evening in contemporary society and contemporary challenges as well. So I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Dr. Susan Watson, who's going to be our main speaker this evening. Susan is a qualitative, intersectional feminist criminologist and is a lecturer here in the School for Business and Society in Criminal Justice and Social Policy, same as me. And she leads our criminal justice degree programmes in the school. Her research focuses on technology-facilitated gendered violence. So that's going to be the focus this evening. But her commitment to gender equality is broader than that. She is our co-chair for our Athena Swan committee in the school and does sterling work there. And she is a very committed criminologist more broadly. She's a member of the executive board for the British Society of Criminology. She's a member of the Social Policy Association and a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. So I think we're probably all aware in the room that we now live in a world where the borders between our professional activity are blurred between online presence and our work online and the physical world. But I think up till now there hasn't been much attention paid to the risks associated now that there is an occupational obligation really to have an online presence. And that's what Susan's focusing on tonight, the gap that in our knowledge in this area about the online abuse of women at work. And Susan's going to talk using verbatim accounts from her research, which I think will very clearly demonstrate that online abuse is a very real consequence for being a woman at work in this day and age. Here is her wonderful book, which I think there's some flyers around as well for you, Gendered Online Abuse Against Women in Public Life. It's very timely, it's very necessary for us to understand this new level of risk that we're exposed to as women at work. And her focus is on women working across public sector occupations and the digital abuse they have experienced in those roles. She's going to focus on some theoretical ideas and also some policy recommendations for us to consider and perhaps discuss in the Q&A afterwards. So Susan's going to talk for about 40 minutes and then we'll have about 20 minutes to have a discussion at the end. So without further ado, over to Susan.
Thank you, Sharon, and it's lovely to see so many people here. I wasn't sure how many people I'd be speaking to at this time on a Thursday evening, so thank you very much for coming out and participating. Sharon's introduced me far better than I think I could introduce myself, but I just want to thank Sharon. She's one of the people that I thank in the front of the book because she's been part of this research and encouraged the research right from the very start. And it's something that I'm, very appreciative of, both on a scholarship level, but also a personal level. So I can take the opportunity to embarrass you and thank you now. So yes, gendered abuse of women in public life. I think now we see, or we think we now have an awareness of abuse of politicians, for example, something that gets into the tabloids quite a lot, particularly around general election campaigns. But I think what I wanted to discover and what the background to the research was this idea that it wasn't just politicians, and if it was just politicians, or just politicians as well, was how that abuse, what it looked like, what it felt like, and how it differed amongst occupational groups. So as I say, I started the research with this idea of knowing that that the abuse that I saw, just as someone who was kind of regular Guardian reader, I guess, level, was very kind of questioning of women's competence, integrity, appearance, and that the way that abuse occurs online is very different to how it's appeared traditionally. You know, people have always had a pop at politicians. You know, that there's nothing new about that. The difference is that, and I speak as somebody who's worked in politics since the mid-90s, is that you used to have to get a piece of paper and a pen and an envelope and a stamp and write your letter. And by the time you'd done all that and put the letter in the envelope and then found the stamp and then walked down to the post box, the chances are you'd have kind of lost your fire by then. You'd have kind of lost whatever it was that was making you cross. Whereas now it's instant. It's instantaneous. Anyone can say whatever they want, allegedly, without any recourse. And I think what I wanted to do was to investigate, firstly, what the abuse was like. Secondly, who was affected by abuse, and what social networking sites and other forms of online communication had done to create a permissive society where the abuse of women was okay. So that was where I was coming from. So I framed that in three research questions. So the first one, I wanted to know how women in public facing occupations were targeted online, whether abuse differed by sector, and what effect abuse has on the digital world. I did that by speaking to four separate occupational groups. That was academics, journalists, politicians, and police officers. The reason I chose those groups was that initial research using Twitter showed that they were the four groups that were the most likely to receive abuse. And the first thing that people always ask is, why did you only speak to women? What about the men? I've got two answers to that. One is flippant and one is not flippant. The flippant one first, which is the one that you get if I'm feeling rather cross, is why can't the men go and do their own research for once? But we'll just park that one. But the second reason is because the abuse that women receive is different. It's because, firstly, in terms of number, in terms of scale, women are far more likely to get abuse than men. But when men get abuse, it itself is gendered. What do I mean by that? I mean that the threats that men receive are threatening their wives, their sisters, their girlfriends, their daughters. And if you look at it through that lens, it actually becomes really shocking. So that was where I was coming from. And it came from a theoretical framework that said online abuse was yet another manifestation of gender-based violence. This was not new in that phrase. What was new was the delivery mechanism, excuse me, of the abuse, but the abuse has been going on for time immemorial.
Oh, God, sorry, that's me.
Thank you, Sharon. And that actually that abuse is driven by misogyny. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go through. So what did I do? I did a qualitative analysis of Twitter. By the way, I'm going to call it Twitter all the way through. Firstly, because that was how my participants referred to it. And secondly, because I refuse to call it X, but let's just say that's why. I do know that it's now called X, which somebody once did ask me, did you know Elon Musk runs it now? But I took, I compiled a sample frame of 250 people, of 250 women who were the most likely to be affected by online abuse. And then I created managed to track 3 Twitter storms of activity around different topics using a Twitter API. In the end, I qualitatively analysed 10.3 million tweets and collected data for 6 months. So it was a big data set. And it's also now impossible to replicate because API use used to be free for academics. It was one of the joys of Twitter because Facebook never let you into their data, but Twitter always did. But now you can't unless you pay. If you wanted to do what I did, it would cost you millions. So again, that kind of says something about how the landscape has changed over the last couple of years. And the other part of the research was 50 semi-structured interviews with those 4 occupational groups, with academics, journalists, politicians and police officers, based in the UK, the USA and the EU. All of them had an online presence, and all of them were active on Twitter, plus other platforms. And most of them I recruited simply by tweeting them and asking them if they wanted to participate. So what did I find out? I found out that online abuse consists of 7 elements. Those 7 elements are belittlement, criticism of appearance, emotional harm, harassment, silencing, threat, and defamation. Now, I'm not saying that each of those 7 elements occur in every episode of online abuse, but I can promise you that at least one of them will. So the next time you see something, that's my task for you, is have a look to see if you can find how many of those 7 elements you can find. So that was the first finding. The second finding, and these are all genuine tweets, by the way, and I wish I could tell you that it took me hours to find them, but it didn't. I found that abuse differs by occupation, and as far as I can see, I'm the first person to find that out, basically, which is that politicians and journalists are more likely to receive violent or sexualised threats. Police officers were more likely to receive abuse that targets their age or their appearance, and academics receive both. The reason why isn't clear. I think it's probably, and again, I haven't tested this, but I think it's probably something to do with the fact that people are still nervous to make direct threats to police officers because they are more likely to understand the law and know that actually it is illegal to make a death threat against somebody. It has always been illegal to make a death threat against somebody. And whether you do that online or you do that in person, it's the same offence. So that, again, gives us a difference. So I'm going to give myself a chance to have some water. I'm going to give you the first of this kind of deep dive into the data tonight. And this is an example from the data of those 7 elements, one of each of these 7 elements. The first lot are from academics. These are all verbatim quotes, by the way, from the interviews. And the elements came out afterwards as I analysed them. So I'll give you a moment to read that slide while I have some water. Now remember that these are academic. We're not celebrities. We're not. I mean, some of us are in our own environment, but we're not. We don't become academics in order to have a public face, but quite often it's required by our institution in order to promote the university, for example. And out of the quotes that I would pull out here is the one on the end here, defamation, which was from a woman. She was actually, you'll hear from her again later. She was actually American and had actually moved to the EU because of the abuse that she was getting in the US and the effects that was having, which I'll go on to later. But she won a very large research grant. She's a biologist to do something really exciting with cells, plant cells, not kind of human cells. And she was really excited about this, and then and tweeted about it, which is what we have to do to publicise our work. And she was criticised for saying that she would use the money irresponsibly and what a waste it was. And she was really hurt by that. She found that really difficult to deal with. Examples from journalists. I think silencing threat harassment is all something that perhaps sadly we would expect. I think the one in the middle, threat, is this idea of right now in the United States, women would love to write about white supremacist extremism, but they don't because of profound worries about their personal safety. And I don't think that situation has got any better since the time period that I was collecting data. And I shall leave that there. And the other one, the harassment about pile-ons. This idea that somehow, you become a focus for, a particular group. And you will get thousands and thousands and thousands of tweets, thousands and thousands of insults within a really short space of time. You're talking like 2, 3, 4 hours, which is just incredibly hard to deal with, both emotionally but also practically, because it kind of locks up all your social media as well. Next, from police officers. And again, the one that I pick out is this one about competence. They say I'm stupid, they say I'm naive, that the comments I make are inaccurate. Every time I say anything, they say I'm wrong. That comment was made to me by who was then the most senior woman police officer in England and Wales. She also spoke about the fact that, and this goes into kind of appearance, that she felt that whenever she walked down Downing Street, photographers were always trying to, or people would kind of take photos that had been taken and then try and enlarge them to see if she had shown something either of her body or shown something of the papers that she was carrying to kind of catch her out almost. And she knew that was what was happening. Politicians, I think the one that still sticks with me is the emotional harm quote. I'm utterly worn down, like ground down to a paste, from having to deal with active abuse or the fear of abuse. And the woman who talked to me, who provided that quote, described it as being like being in an abusive relationship, but it was one that she could not escape. So altogether, it also showed me that when we looked at how criminal justice organisations, police, CPS, courts, and wider social policy, so other institutions, were dealing with this activity, is very poor. And the reason it's very poor is for a number of reasons, most of which are on the slide. So that's a lack of funding. There is a lack of a lack of money in the criminal justice system in general. And if you say you want to give money to people to investigate online abuse, it's not top of people's list, let's put it that way. A lack of knowledge. Quite often police officers on the ground who have to investigate are unfamiliar with the technologies and unfamiliar with the damage that they do, and so therefore don't know how to respond, partly because of a lack of training. There was also very much felt that there was a lack of support. There was no one was going to come and help and guide you through the process. And lastly, a lack of action. You know, I would say the majority of women I spoke to very sadly had been told that all they needed to do was come off the internet. Well, I do most of my work on the internet in one way, shape or form, and it's not that easy anymore. And what I found was that this led women to create their own informal support networks. And actually, because of that, it was the reason why an awful lot of women stayed in the online space, because the richness and the value of those informal networks was almost worth the abuse that they would face. So, as Sharon said, I'm a intersectional feminist researcher, and a lot of my work is around listening to women's voices. And that's what I really like about the book, is that there is a copy up the front here. If you flick through it, you will see that there's an awful lot of the kind of quotes that I've just shared with you, because it was very important to me to get the voices of the women who are dealing with this abuse out there and heard. So my research revealed that online abuse is damaging. It prevents women's advancement across the public sphere. It stops women taking positions of promotion. It stops them taking positions of importance because they do not want to have to deal with the online abuse. And I feel very strongly that for women that, the young women that I teach every week, an awful lot of them won't go into public-facing occupations because they do not want to deal with it. And they will go and make their way and be incredibly successful in their lives and will make an amazing contribution, but it won't be in the public sphere. And that is a loss to all of us. The abuse is dangerous. It's dangerous to individuals and it's dangerous to institutions. Is driven by misogyny. As I think you can see from the quotes, and you'll see from the quotes that come in a moment, the abuse is highly gendered. It is about the facets that make you who you are. It's about your role and your position as a woman. And lastly, it presents a democratic threat, and that feels a little bit overblown when you first read it, but actually I spoke to politicians who decided to abstain in political votes because they could not face the abuse that would have come if they had voted in a certain way. And I found that really, really shocking, that was the effect it was having. Or people who would, at a lesser level, who would say, I really wanted to comment on that issue, but I just didn't, because I don't have the energy. And I think that's really sad, because it's silencing women, and we're silencing our own voices almost. So I'm going to give you another set of examples now of those different voices. So firstly, academics. The first one was from a woman in the UK, where it says, there's a kind of abuse which is a relentless deluge of negative content. It doesn't even necessarily have to be swearing or violent threat, just this constant telling you time and time and time again that you are not good at your job, or you are wasting money or wasting time, or those kinds of insults. And as she said, it's hundreds and hundreds of people. It's organised online. There is no way that this is not harassment. This other quote, I think, gives you an idea of just how dangerous some of this activity is. And it came from a woman who said she actually tried to get in touch, this is in the US, and she tried to get in touch with the police department to say, I know I'm at risk. And she was at risk of swatting. Now, I didn't know what that was when I started this research. It's basically, and forgive me if you all know, and I was the only one who didn't, but basically it's where somebody who wishes to cause you harm will call the police, or purportedly on your behalf, and say that there is somebody in your property with a gun. Because that will mean that the police department will send an armed response to your home, which then will put you at risk. She was a woman of colour, and as she said, that in marginalised communities, in black neighbourhoods, actually being swatted itself is a threat. The response of the police, by the way, was that we don't have anywhere to record that. We can't do anything with that. So, looking at journalists, the one, again, is from a British journalist who talked to me about when her first book came out. And she was expecting a bit of kind of pushback from misogynists, because it was about gender. And then she wrote a second book that looked at the history of white supremacy. And she found herself on the receiving end of basically an organised campaign from the US, which actually meant that both herself, her family and her small children were all in danger and had to be given police support for a few days because it was so orchestrated. And then someone else, the other issue that we find is that it's very difficult for police in the UK, police in England and Wales, to take action when the abuse is perpetrated from someone in the US. So she said that, she became a target, but the police were just shrugging their shoulders because nothing they can do because it's outside their jurisdiction. And obviously the American police were like, but you don't know where this person is. And so therefore it just kind of fell. And it's that kind of helplessness as well, that there's nowhere to go if you find yourself at risk. Police officers, the quote where it says there are a number of accounts, all of them anonymous, who every time I say something, say I'm stupid, I'm naive, that the comments I make on behalf of the organisation are inaccurate. Very much felt that this actually came from within the police force, that was actually being orchestrated from within her colleagues, which again was quite frightening. Politicians, and this was where it got really kind of scary, I think. This one here where she received a message, this was in an email and then followed up online, which said, protect your child, it would be a shame if something happened to him when he went to school. She'd just given birth 6 months before. She said also she had an older child who was at nursery, and then it meant that her and her husband had to go in and talk to the nursery manager about the risk that there might be, and it would probably be okay, but she said it just led this whole kind of chain of really awful things to have to think about. And again, this quote here is the same woman who said, it feels like they're chasing you to your very marrow, and they'll never leave you alone. Unsurprisingly, she did stand down at the general election because she just didn't want to deal with that anymore. But as I've said earlier, because of the kind of gap in formalised support systems, women very much go out and find their own support. So as one woman said, this is not a friendly space. This is not where we belong. You know, meaning the internet, because it was invented by men and it is run by men. This was never our space. So therefore we have to support each other in the same way that women have supported each other if you go right the way back to the kind of second wave feminism, which I did actually as part of this research. And right from the 1970s onwards, women have always supported each other in the face of this kind of abuse. And the fact that it is now happening online is actually no different. And I really like this other one, when I see individuals receiving some sort of negativity, I always chip in. That was another police officer who said, you know, she kind of made it almost her kind of evening job was to go and see where police officers were being targeted and to just kind of push the tide the other way a bit, which again made me feel quite good. Another kind of sort of interesting snippet was when I spoke to politicians of all political parties. And the thing that I found really interesting and actually really kind of joyful was the fact that when women politicians were targeted for abuse, there was a whole kind of group of other women who would support them. And that support overrode any kind of political allegiance. So, you know, Conservative and Labour MPs were very close and supported each other through these kind of episodes, which again was interesting. So what are the consequences? I've talked about lots of different consequences, but to put them together, I think there are personal consequences. And so Eileen, who is the person I mentioned, she's the biologist. You know, she was writing about research, she was writing about social justice, she was writing about racism. She was actually writing about racism within European countries because she's a woman of colour. And she said that this guy sort of, you know, DM'd her or whatever, and then he then found her details on the university website and emailed her. He then rang her, and she said she felt really unsafe all of a sudden because of the amount of information that was known about her in the public space. And I don't think that's something that we really think about very often. Organisational. This one, again, was a quote saying that people who had actually had to cancel events like this because bomb threats were made to the venue, and they were warned by the police to actually cancel the events. So obviously that's a huge impact for organisations. And also I think it has huge impacts for scholarship, because people will stop researching in the sort of areas that mean that they get abuse. And that will constrain the sort of work we can do, the most important work, the life-changing work that we can do, because it constrains us, and it also then limits career progression. And that's something, just to kind of tie those up really. So Suad said that she had definitely turned down things that she knew would get abuse, or, you know, toned police, as she called it. And also there was a point where she just came off of social media completely because of the level of abuse. And she knew that that meant that she was missing opportunities, particularly around academic conferences where, you know, it's typical to put your Twitter handle in the conference guide so that people who are at the conference can then get in touch with you and talk about your work or your paper. And she knew that she was missing things because of that. Again, Eileen, as I said, she explained the tenure system to me in the US, which is that when you are appointed as an academic, you're only on a temporary contract, and you have to produce a certain amount of impact, whether that's published papers, published work, speaking at conferences and the like. And if you don't have that, you have to prove that you have that in order to get tenure, which is basically after a few years you get your permanent job. But because women are receiving threats when they speak out, it means they don't speak, which means they don't then get tenure. So that's having a huge impact. She said the reason that she had moved to the EU was because the difference between in a tenured position and a non-tenured position was about $10,000 a year. So it was having a real impact on her economic well-being. And lastly, I think, again, those of us who work in this kind of information, this is not new, which is that if you are also, as well as, if you are a woman of colour, if you are disabled, if you are gay or transgender, then the abuse you receive is amplified. It's all of those parts of your identity are just ripped apart. So it's not just the fact you're a woman, it's the fact that A, B, C and D as well. And I think the point that a number of women that I spoke to made was the fact that they felt that it wasn't that the men within their organisations didn't support them, it was the fact that they were oblivious to the fact that this abuse even existed. And so it was that made that even harder as well. So, conclusions. Basically, my research says that we need policy change. And I organised those policy changes on 3 different levels. At an individual level, I think we need greater digital literacy, we need greater training. I very much feel that as someone who works with young people, who works in a university, that as part of the career service that we offer students, we should be offering them skills in how to protect themselves online. We should know how to block, how to report, how you do that, what you do if you're faced with AI images of yourself that have been spread around the classroom, for example. So that young people themselves are armed with the knowledge of knowing what to do and how to navigate a world where this isn't going to go away. At an organisational level, I think we need greater support from institutions. And that means things like, I spoke to an academic who had done some work on incels and had been told that she was there was some risk to her because of that work. And she had spoken to the university about this, and they had, emphasised how they would support her and how, she didn't need to worry. And then she went into work the open day on the Saturday morning, and there was a 12-foot high picture of her on the banner because she'd done a BBC documentary on incels. And it's that kind of disconnect, really. And that's not just universities, it's also, I would argue, political parties as well. Really need to protect their candidates a lot better. It's newspapers protecting their journalists. Obviously slightly different with police forces, but again, the support that was quite often offered to police officers was, well, let the media team run your social media accounts. But then they were saying, but then that takes away my voice. And it's finding that spot of being able to support your employees, but also letting them have a voice. But lastly, it's structural change. I would argue that we need structural change to challenge misogyny, just like we did 200 years ago. It's the same thing. It's just manifested in different ways, I would suggest. The reality on the ground, and again, Eileen kind of talks, and this is something I spoke about a moment ago, which is this idea that she would talk to her male colleagues and they literally had no idea. And we know that this is the case with online abuse all the way through. And I actually worked with a woman who is in the US, who has now kind of taken it upon her job, basically, is to go around and teach judges about social media and what it means and how it can be used as a threat. The example she gave me was working with, this is in the kind of domestic abuse, gender-based intimate partner violence sphere, which I also work in, where she gave me an account of someone she had worked with whose ex-partner had said, "On the day that I kill you, I will send you roses." And then one day she opened up Facebook and all there was a cartoon of a rose that he had posted on Facebook. And she went to the police and they were like, "What's your problem? It's just Facebook. Don't worry about it." Just that complete disconnect. And so because of that, she actually teaches the judiciary what social media does and the impacts that it can have. And I think that's the sort of thing that we need throughout the public sector. And lastly, though, this is the last quote in the book, and it's this one that I like the most, I think, which was, "Peggy, these are all pseudonyms, but she is a Member of Parliament, and she is still a Member of Parliament. And we don't fight this by hiding from it. I'm much more scared of a world where online abuse stops people coming forward than I am scared of a world where people come forward and might suffer it. I'm willing to give my life to that. I'm much more frightened to sit down than I am to stand up." That's it. Thank you very much. And the book is available for free, I should say. You can actually read it without having to pay for it, thanks to the ESRC and open access. So if you Google it, you can get a free copy. But if you would like a physical copy, like Sharon's got at the front, there are flyers and with discount codes and things as well. So thank you very much. Right, I'll come over here now.
Okay, we'll open it out to questions. I'm sure everybody's got some interesting comments to make. Who would like to, if you just put your hand up and then wait for one of the stewards to come with a mic.
It's better. Get a different view now.
Anybody got any questions?
Yes.
Just this lady down here with the purple top. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that talk, by the way. I think everything that was discussed needs to be, whether it's in conversations like this or just in general public, it needs to be done. I wanted to know about your opinion on the Online Safety Act. I'm not sure when you began your research, but obviously it was spoke about in 2021, got kind of put into legislation in 2023 and moved forwards. And a lot of criticisms that I've seen about the Online Safety Act have been about its ignorance of gender. Mm-hmm. The only time in that act that it mentions gender is when it gives Ofcom like the ability to produce guidance on gender. That's kind of it. And it was heralded as this great kind of piece of legislation to protect children. And I mean, everyone I spoke to, it doesn't do that. Mm. It puts children at risk. It puts women at risk. It doesn't do anything to support any kind of person, really. And I just wanted to know how your research, and especially when you said about like policy change, how something like the Online Safety Act would kind of impact that, and like what kind of suggestions you would pose to make that a bit more like available to women.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. The Online Safety Act was actually first mooted in 2017. We had 16, because of the very strange political system and situation at that time, we had 16 different culture secretaries between the bill first being published and the passing of the legislation. I have to admit that 2 years ago, British Society of Criminology Conference, I gave a presentation similar to this, but it ended saying that the Online Safety Act was a Frankenstein bill and it was never going to become legislation. It became legislation 3 months afterwards. So, yeah. But I'll hold my hands up to that one. What do I think about it? It's difficult. It's there. It's something. It's better than nothing, I would say. I think having Ofcom as the regulator is an excellent idea, and I think that's really good. Ofcom have been really well funded to take those cases forwards. So that's all positive. Something happened between, well, lots of things happened between the publishing of the bill and it becoming law. But I think the main thing, and I think you alluded to this, was the fact that the focus shifted from online abuse across the board to the safety of children. Mm. And that is very different. You know, those kind of issues are very different to the issues that I was talking about just now. And I'm not saying they are not important. They are very important issues, but they are different issues. And the way that I would describe it is, if, you know, because I have had debates where people have said, are you saying that children aren't important? I'm saying no. What I'm saying is that is one hell of a present to give your daughter on her 18th birthday. Because there's nothing. Sorry, I'm trying to remember all the other bits of your question. Yes, I think there was a time when the bill was when the final version of the bill was going through Parliament, I was part of a very small group of people who campaigned on the fact that there was actually no mention of the word women in the text at all. Of the Online Safety Act, as it now is. I think now there are 16 mentions, something like that, but very, 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 very small. So, yeah, it's not really doing anything for this. It's a shame. Obviously, if Brexit comes into everything, if we hadn't have left the European Union, we would now be covered by the EU Act on social media regulation, digital regulation, where the rules are much, much stricter. So again, something we've lost. Have I answered all the points? Okay.
Anybody else have a question? Yes.
Thank you very much for your talk. Really, really interesting, and all the work you've done. My question was just quite simple. Has there been a study, research done about gendered online abuse just against women in general, as opposed to women in public life?
There is work. There are pockets. It's interesting. There are pockets of work. A lot of it comes from the US, unsurprisingly, perhaps. There is a really, really active research base on this issue coming from Australia. Again, really interesting. UK, not so much. There's a few of us, but not many. And really, what it looks at is intimate partner violence and technology-facilitated gendered abuse, but within relationships or within familial relationships. So ex-partners, boyfriends, or even children or, other relatives. But there isn't really anything it's a good question, actually. You know, what if you're not in public life and you're not being abused in a relationship? No, I don't think there is anything.
I'm just thinking to just add to that, you widen the public lives include celebrities.
Yeah.
Any newspaper account, and the following that goes on for women is just
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah, no.
chose for category, but, you know,
I think Sharon was the one who told me I wasn't allowed to go and talk to celebrities. I seem to
I don't
remember.
remember doing that, but I probably...
Susan, you've got all these people on here now.
Stop, I think
Yeah.
I probably said. Yeah.
That's not, that doesn't fit in any of those groups.
I think what was interesting was it was about the sort of occupational obligation to be online that you talked about so clearly tonight, and it not really being a choice in a lot of these careers and the consequences of that. And I guess celebrities share quite a bit of that, sort of you have to have that online profile, don't you now?
It's interesting, actually. One of the things, there's so much I could say, is that there was a different person, I didn't use their quotes, who did some work with the BBC, a documentary, and the BBC were really hot on this and knew that she would be a target for abuse. And in one of the first planning meetings, because they knew this would be a high-profile piece, they have an agency, a private company, that basically go in and manage the social media accounts of all their top kind of talent, or anyone that they feel is going to be particularly at risk. So they don't even see it. You know, there is that kind of mechanism, which is great if you're one of those people who is covered by that. But if you're not, I think it says an awful lot about where we are. And in terms of politicians, the most senior politicians don't see this stuff because they have staff members who see it or deal with it. It's the junior MPs who don't maybe have one member of staff who kind of trawl. They talk to me about, you know, the last thing they did before they went to sleep was go through their Twitter profile to see if there was any casework they had to pick up on, and then get a death threat as you lie in your bed. That was one that particularly stuck with me.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I answer your question? Okay.
Anybody else? Sam. Wait for the mic, Sam.
Thank you very much. A really interesting talk and a great piece of research. I was quite interested when you said you went through 10 million tweets, is that right? And you've got a data set of these 50 individual accounts, and they're all very kind of explicit in their experiences of abuse, and you've read all of these tweets that also contain abuse. My question is kind of how did you find managing that as part of the research process?
I think, good question. I think a lot of the time I was driven by anger and fury. So that kind of kept me going. There are people in this audience who also kept me going and allowed me to decompress. I probably swore quite a lot. But just actually seeking out support from other people, just in the same way as the women here did as well. I would also say that it stopped me letting my children have access to certain social media. And they're here and they're really not happy about it. So, there you go.
It's a nice link between that informal networks and support. It was a very positive element of the study to see that in evidence, wasn't it? Yeah. Yes. Just one moment, please, if you could just wait for the mic. Thank you.
And I noticed you didn't mention anything about sex, as in having sex, because one kind of abuse would be, such and such a woman has done what she's done because she's had sex with Mr. Y, for example, or she's working in a particular field because of her sexual relationship. Whether or not she's had one is a different story. But do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I think there was more of that in terms of the Twitter data set, those kind of, the raw data. There was an awful lot of that kind of stuff. The women that I spoke to individually, those kind of long form interviews, didn't really have much of that. That wasn't something that they had experienced. I think if I had, or when I did come across that, and there was elements of it, I would put that under defamation in terms of because it was defamatory to that individual.
It's part of questioning competence, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're just there because you're ticking a box
Yeah.
type stuff. Yeah, I think it happens a lot. Anybody else before we finish? Yes. Thanks.
I'm retired, I'm not in the workplace anymore. I wondered if you knew if anything was actually happening in the workplace, such as guidance within companies or education within companies.
It's very patchy.
Very patchy.
It's very patchy would be my response. I did a piece of work last summer, which is kind of on the back burner somewhere, where I did freedom of information requests to all of the universities in the UK about what support systems they had in place for their staff who were victims of this kind of harassment as a result of the jobs. And some universities had really, really good systems in place. The one that sticks out is Durham, actually. Unsurprisingly, they have the largest kind of domestic gendered violence unit at Durham, so I don't think those two are surprising. And then I have to admit that it fulfilled all my prejudices when the University of Oxford gave a nil return because they don't experience any abuse at all. But they were the kind of two extremes. And I would say that the rest were kind of in the middle, because quite often women wouldn't report this stuff because they go, well, what's the point? Mm-hmm. They don't know who it is. They're not going to do anything. So and that's where that kind of individual teaching and training is important to say, yes, absolutely, you should report this. Mm-hmm. So it's something for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Kirsty, and then we'll go to you.
Hi, thank you. Amazing, as always. Thanks, Susan. And the book is brilliant. I have read it. So please do read it, open access, or buy.
She is my friend, but I haven't asked her to do this.
When I got in, I went, I got that. I wanted to ask a genuine question, not a posted question as your friend. So one of the things that we see often in intimate partner violence is a feeling of shame. And I thought about it when you had that response about how women don't always talk about it. Was shame something that came across strongly in your interviews? Of one of those impacts and how that might lead to how they then act in wider life, either not reporting or how they might retreat from public life, or was that not something? Maybe the people who were willing to speak to you were less likely to feel that shame.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, actually, because obviously people are self-selecting in terms of whether they wanted to speak to me or not. I think there was a feeling of, how do you describe it, shame, or I would go rather that it was embarrassment. They felt embarrassed that, that all these people had said something about their work and about what they were trying to do, and then they would have to kind of go to talk to people and it would be really awkward. There was that feeling. So I don't know if I'd call it shame, but I would certainly call it embarrassment. I think there was a sense of shame for women who felt that they had put their family in danger. That was quite a big thing, was particularly amongst politicians who'd felt, there's this idea of, in one of the quotes is, I feel sorry for my children because they didn't sign up for this life. Mm-hmm. They are the consequence of this. And a woman, it was actually Peggy who gave the quote at the end, who told me a story about how she was locally in the constituency and her son wanted to go to a book signing in the local Waterstones. So she took him along, and she was really excited because she was at home and she could take him into the school holidays. So they went along to Waterstones, and her son was kind of kept edging backwards, and she thought it was because he was self-conscious or he was embarrassed. And she said, come on, you know, he'll sign your book for you. And he went, no, I'll stay here. He must have been, I don't know, 9, 10, something like that. No, younger, 8 or 9. And he said, no, I need to stand near the door, because then if somebody comes in to get you, I'll be able to run out.
That's terrible.
And that was, she said, that was the thing that nearly broke her. So shame, I think, about the impact it has on other people. God, it's a real downer, isn't it?
Very powerful, very powerful. I think lady in the cardigan, and then we'll have to call it a day.
I know you said that it's very difficult to get the police to act in these situations. Are there any particular triggers that cause them to take action?
I think it's very patchy. Again, it kind of really depends on the individual force. Sadly, it depends on the person. If you are a member of Parliament, you're more likely to get a police response, is the truth. If you are, you know, someone and you're in a force where they don't actually deal with this, or the person that you speak to, first of all, that's obviously quite often the thing that's important, and that's the same we know with any contact in the criminal justice system. If you don't get a positive response, first of all, then it may not go anywhere. It really is just luck, and it shouldn't be just luck. I think the last thing I would say, and I know we're all really bang on time, is the fact that, and this was something that, again, even, you know, came up a number of times from different people, including politicians, where if you chose that you wanted to take a case, they would ask you to read through all the tweets or all the instances of abuse, to tell them which ones were abusive and which ones were the problem, so they could then make a case. But that was re-victimising somebody, and quite often at that point women would just drop the case because they were like, I can't engage with that content again. Because to read it all would actually, to go back to Sam's point, would cause you distress. You just want to move on, you want to forget it ever happened. Yeah.
Thanks for some great questions. That was fantastic. I think you'll join me now to thank Susan for we could be here for another hour, I think, talking it through. I've got loads of questions I want to ask you myself. But can you join with me and thank Susan, and thank you all for coming. It's been a great hour. Thank you very much.